the time. We've got a great evening, I think, set up for your educational and thought-provoking evening. My name's Don Peterson. I'm on the steering committee of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, which is, of course, one of the sponsors for this three-part series. And I am also a member of the Unitarian Universalists of Southern Delaware. This is my spiritual home, and we especially want to welcome you to UUSD and hope that you have an enjoyable time here tonight. And with that, I just want to introduce to you our moderator for this evening. She is a remarkable woman who I have come to know and love, and former head of the social work department at Delaware State University, and an active member in the Women's March Sussex, Marlene Saunders.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And welcome. My task this evening is to function as the moderator for the second in a series of meetings, discussions, town hall talk meetings, conversations pertaining to anti-Semitism and racism. Before we begin, I want to extend some thank yous to people and organizations that have played a major role in putting these important meetings together. A thank you to the Unitarian Universalists of Southern Delaware for the use of the church this evening. Another thank you to the Planning Committee, which includes Women's March Sussex, the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, and the Seaside Jewish Community Center. And a final thank you to the Jewish Family Service of Sussex County for allowing the steering committee to hold its planning meetings there. This is the plan for this evening. I'm going to begin by summarizing the first meeting. And what it will do is summarize the historical perspectives that were given by our two key speakers at our March meeting. And those two individuals were Rabbi Michael Beals and Dr. James Newton. And what I say will be a setup to our presentation this evening by Ms. Burstein. And as you see, the title is Fighting Hate for Good: White Supremacy, Racism, and Anti-Semitism. After she gives her presentation, we're going to have a question and answer period, whereby individuals who want to do that will come to the center aisle and ask your question at the microphone. We want to give everyone who wants to ask a question the opportunity to do that, so that if you have a follow-up question once a response is given, we would ask that you hold off until all questions are asked, and then we can go back to follow-up questions. Does that make sense? Okay. The Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, Women's March Sussex, and Seaside Jewish Community are co-hosting conversations regarding racism and anti-Semitism to, among other things, provide audiences with a deeper understanding of how these two serious problems impact African Americans and Jews in similar ways, and why the recent increase in the level of hatred towards these two groups creates important and necessary opportunities for Jews and African Americans, social justice-oriented faiths, and concerned citizens to work together to say no to hate-fueled racism and anti-Semitism. Thus far, we have learned from the first conversation, facilitated by Rabbi Michael Beals and Dr. James Newton, that anti-Semitism and racism have long histories in the United States. According to Rabbi Beals, history tells us that anti-Semitism can be traced to 1600 before the Common Era, when Pharaoh decided there were too many Jewish boys in the region and without any rationale ordered their brutal slaughter. Dr. Newton informed us that history also tells us that racism can be linked to American slavery beginning in the 17th century, 400 years ago. The peculiar institution's sole purpose was to obtain free labor by capturing and enslaving Africans to do the work white Americans would not do, and from which Native Americans were able to flee until the entire continent was stolen from them. In similar fashion, Christian slaveholders and leaders of the dominant religions used the Bible to justify the unequal status of blacks and Jews and their degradation. For instance, most of us are familiar with the stereotype of Jews as unscrupulous moneylenders. However, how many of us know that the group was forced into this area of commerce when the Catholic Church, determined to stop Christians from collecting interest from other Christians, made the decision to allow Jews to lend money to Christians with interest based on anti-usury passages in the Bible, thereby giving Jews who lived in Central and Eastern Europe and were not permitted to own land the opportunity to earn a living during the economic growth that was occurring in Northern Europe. The group's history and finance then evolved from anti-Semitic regulations that prohibited Jews from participating in a society's economic institution. We can say then that Jews took advantage of their oppression. Similarly, the gospel has been misinterpreted to justify white supremacy against African Americans. I bring your attention to the curse of Ham. The story in Genesis is that after learning that his son Ham saw him naked, Noah cursed his grandson Canaan to servitude. Even though biblical passages do not refer to dark skin, anyone's color for that matter, to Africa, or even Canaan's descendants as being cursed too, biblical scholars over time describe Ham as black and as the father of African peoples. And, as in the case of Jews, the misinterpretation of biblical references placed African Americans in outcast status and enabled every institution in American society to erect barriers that kept them outside the American mainstream in such areas as housing, politics, education, and the church. Need not apply, don't enter, you will not replace us, then pertain to both Africans, Americans, and Jews. Despite laws that today prohibit discrimination against African Americans and Jews, and apologies by the church for perpetuating anti-Semitism, and the U.S. House of Representatives' apology for slavery and Jim Crow, the legacies of racism and anti-Semitism prevail. Thus, regardless of the contributions of blacks and Jews to American culture, the economy, and their advocacy for social justice for whites and African Americans, a Jew, though white, is still a, and I'm not going to say the K word. Similarly, African Americans, no matter how accomplished, are still just, and I'm not going to say the N word. We therefore hope that the first town hall meeting, this conversation, and the one that will follow make clear that the kind of alliances between Jews and African Americans that existed during the Civil Rights Movement, the intersectional partnership that was represented by the National Conference for Jews and Christians, must be revived and strengthened with the support of other ethnically diverse partnerships in order to, 1, aggressively respond to anti-Semitism and racism, 2, sensitize people to microaggressions that are uttered unintentionally, but nevertheless insulting. And 3, stand up against the prejudice, hate, and violence other groups experience. Here I'm speaking of such groups as gay and lesbian, transgender, the disabled, women, etc. We then must apply Martin Niemöller's words to the situation that brings us together this evening. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. I will add, then they came for African Americans, and I did not speak out because I was not an African American. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Thank you. I am now very pleased, to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, Robin Burstein, Senior Associate Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you for coming out. This is a very interesting group. I'm so glad to be a part of it. I will be a little bit redundant and thank the Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice and the Women's March Sussex and Seaside Jewish Community for inviting me to speak. I want to give a special shout out and a special thank you to Charlotte King, who could not be here this evening. She helped coordinate all of the logistics for the event, and for those of you who know her, she didn't do a half job. She really followed through and was lovely to work with. For tonight's presentation, I'll give a brief overview of ADL and then dive a little bit deeper into anti-Semitism, racism, and white supremacy, what it looks like today, what ADL is doing, and then what you can do. And at the end, there will be time for discussion. As was mentioned, if something is burning in you and you have to ask in that moment, I will not be insulted. I'm not that formal. So, you know, if we need to have a discussion about something while we're discussing it, we can do that too. So I just want to leave that little bit of flexibility open for everybody, okay? So, we'll start. Oops, I should turn this on. So let's talk about ADL just for a minute. Our founding mission took into account the horrid anti-Semitism in 1913, culminating in the lynching of Leo Frank and the second rise of the KKK. For those of you who don't know, Leo Frank was a northern Jew who stood trial after his arrest for a murder he did not commit. He was absolutely convicted because of the anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism hung heavy in the courtroom as he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, a courageous governor later commuted the death sentence to life imprisonment, but Frank never did serve the term because in August of 2015, the Yankee Jew was lynched by a mob calling themselves the Vigilance Committee. It was in this atmosphere of fear, hate, and anger that ADL was formed. Sigmund Livingston was our founder. He was a lawyer, and he spelled out ADL's mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all. When we talk about hate, our work is really based on an understanding in which hate grows and can be challenged and stopped. So with the basic belief that hate is a progressive process that can be interrupted, it's learned and it can be unlearned. It begins with the normalization of less damaging forms of bias, and I know this is a really big picture, I don't know if you guys can see, but the bottom, the foundation, is attitudes. Before it even goes anywhere, stereotyping, fear of differences, microaggressions, things like that. Just basic attitude. If we can change people's mind at this level and stop it at this level, then it never has to escalate to the higher levels. However, if it's not stopped, it can escalate, attitudes can escalate to behaviors, which would be acts of bias. They don't have to be criminal. They could be something simple, a swastika on the bathroom stall at school, or the N-word scrawled across the front sign of a university, right? Those kinds of things happen. And when that goes unchecked, it can lead to discrimination. When that goes unchecked, it can lead to heavier forms of violence and even eventually genocide. We believe that hate needs to be confronted at every single level of the pyramid. And we confront hate at every level of the pyramid in ways that kind of fall into three different buckets. So the three buckets are investigation, advocacy, and education. And I'm going to just, let's talk about them for a quick minute. Investigation. We have a center on extremism and another with staff, and another center on technology and society with a group of staff. And they have really helped enhance ADL's recognition as an internationally renowned expert on hate. We use the expertise that we gain from those researchers in those departments to investigate and prosecute extremism, terrorism, and hate crimes. We also use it to inform our partners in elected office, in schools, and other community organizations and institutions. We speak out against hate proactively, promote equality, and mobilize the community. And this is where I think the most important work gets done. We challenge bias and stereotypes and inoculate kids. We are the leading anti-bias educator in the United States. Our programs impact tens of millions of students and community members and have impacted them since 1985. Our Philadelphia Diversity Expo and the Walk Against Hate bring together thousands of people to learn about diverse groups in the region and walk together against bigotry. And just last week, we held our No Place for Hate designation celebration, and in our region alone, we have over 220 No Place for Hate schools and community organizations. Our Youth Leadership Conference brings together over 50 students and educators, over 500, that's a typo, over 500 students and educators to learn how to recognize and challenge bigotry. We put out, if you are a teacher or know a teacher or have a student, we put out educational resources, if not every day, at least 3 times a week. Constantly paying attention to what's going on in the community and responding to it and putting out resources. So go to www.adl/education/lesson plans, and you can find anything you want, and it's all prepared for you. So let's take a peek at the history of ADL's fight for racial justice. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education was the landmark U.S. Supreme Court school desegregation case. This was ADL's earliest activist support for legislation to end racial discrimination. We filed an amicus brief in that case. Do you know what an amicus brief is? No? Boy, a bunch of lawyers in the audience. ADL has been working to fight racial discrimination and expose the Klan since the 20s. In the 1950s, 6 southern states and 50 communities enacted what are called anti-masking laws. Does anybody remember this? ADL championed those anti-masking laws, which banned the wearing of masks during public demonstrations. By doing this, it impeded the Ku Klux Klan's efforts to terrorize people anonymously, and once those laws took effect, the number of people who were willing to come out and march in the streets right, went down significantly. So I don't know who knows about the ADL and the history of the ADL, but our immediate past CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt is our CEO now, our immediate past CEO, Abe Foxman, if you were to ask him what his most important thing that ADL ever accomplished, he would say it was the anti-masking laws. So here we are at the White House signing the Civil Rights Act. Does anyone recognize anybody in the picture? Okay, so we've got, do you know who the first guy is? I'm sorry? This is ADL's first president, Ben Epstein. No one would know who he was. Standing right next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You guys know. Bob Kennedy and NAACP's Roy Wilkins. Yeah. From the beginning, ADL helped to mobilize support for the civil rights and voting rights legislation, culminating in the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. And today, proudly, we are still fighting for the rights of everyone. So ADL has long heralded the Voting Rights Act as one of the most successful and effective pieces of civil rights legislation ever passed. For almost 5 decades, the Voting Rights Act helped ensure that all eligible Americans could vote. Does anybody know what happened to the Voting Rights Act? I'm sorry? Shelby versus Holder. Right? Shelby, in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court heard a case, Shelby County versus Holder, which challenged the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act. We filed a brief in that case. However, in the incredibly disappointing decision, the Supreme Court struck down large parts of the Voting Rights Act, essentially gutting the heart of the law. And since then, we've seen all kinds of efforts on behalf of states to limit voting rights, including voter ID laws and closing polls and only having them available in certain locations. You probably don't need me to explain what has gone on as recently as this most recent election. The presidential election in 2016 was the first presidential election without a fully functioning Voting Rights Act in more than 50 years. The good news is, one of the first acts of this new freshman class of Congress, you know what they did?
Put it back.
That they want to, right? They introduced legislation to help address voter suppression, and they're trying to reinvigorate some of the important pieces of the Voting Rights Act. It has yet to have to pass the Senate, pass the House. So we will continue to advocate. If we're talking about, at the end, things that organizations can do or communities can do, advocating for these kinds of laws to be passed would be a big one. The Fair Housing Act. Again, in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed a key provision of the Fair Housing Act, which threatened this legislation. However, different than what happened with the Voting Rights Act, this was held up. So what happened was the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs versus the Inclusive Communities Project raised the question whether Fair Housing Act prohibits not just intentional bigotry, but also unjustified practices for disproportionately excluding or harming people based on race, ethnicity, religion, family status, or other characteristics under the Act. This principle, known as disparate impact, has been the law of the land for over 4 decades. Again, ADL filed an amicus brief in that case, and we were pleased that the court did uphold it. The school to prison pipeline. Here's another area. I was chatting with someone before we started that if you as a community are going to have some kind of a project or something to work on, this could be something that would make a big impact. Probably because of the other things that you all do and how active and involved you all are, you will know that today, Black and Latino students are more than twice as likely to drop out of school as their white peers. There are many factors that contribute to this. School suspensions and expulsions are among the best indicators for which students will drop out of school, creating a phenomenon referred to as the school-to-prison pipeline. Harsh school discipline policies that funnel students into the pipeline disproportionately impact students of color, students with disabilities, and students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Data from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights shows that Black students are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than their white peers. Now, what you might think is maybe they're behaving differently, but that's not true. Studies have shown that they are more severely punished for the same behaviors that their white peers just get a warning on. So we're going to talk about all kinds of hate across the spectrum. ADL works to combat all kinds of hate and extremism across the ideological spectrum. We cannot end hate by just talking about one group or one type of hate. It's all interrelated. And here's a small sampling of the types of things that we encounter. Anti-Semitism fits into many of these ideologies. For example, neo-Nazis or the alt-right, white supremacists, and left-wing extremists all, adhere to some form of anti-Semitic belief system. So let's just go. Odinists. They're Nordic. They're out of Scotland, and they believe they're a type of right-wing extremist. Yeah. So some other ones that you might not know: sovereign citizens. Does anybody know what a sovereign citizen is? Sovereign citizens believe they're anti-government extremists. Again, this is across the spectrum. It's not one type, right? Sovereign citizens are extreme anti-government extremism, and they believe that they are sovereign unto their own and do not need to follow any of the laws, including registering your car, or, they don't tend to be violent, but if stopped for a traffic stop and harassed in any way, they can become violent. It's a very extreme, I can't even tell you. They believe in that there's a straw man created in their name when they're born, and the government puts money in the straw man's account, and they should have access to that straw man's account to be able to have money, and the government is keeping their money away from that. It's a bizarre way of thinking, as are most of these, extreme, bizarre ways of thinking. So what is anti-Semitism? And I know you went through this a bit before with the rabbi, and just ADL's definition of anti-Semitism, just so that we're all on the same page for the conversation tonight, refers to prejudice or discrimination against Jews as individuals and as a group. Anti-Semitism is based on stereotypes and myths that target Jews as a people, their religious practices and beliefs, and the Jewish state of Israel. So, what is the state of anti-Semitism today? While we don't really know the numbers for certain, because we know that incidents are significantly underreported, what we do have is ADL's audit of the anti-Semitic incidents, and I took like a half a dozen of them. They're out on the table if anybody's really interested in digging into it. And that audit includes incidents that are either reported to ADL or ADL learns about through media alerts or other sources or other partner sources. And so we do have that, and we do have year over year, since 1979, been able to track that information. So even though it may not be the exact correct information, it is comparing apples to apples, because it's comparing what ADL has learned about through some source to what ADL has learned about through some source. Does that make sense? So here's what we found. You can see certain trends. For nearly a decade, if you can see 2004 to 2014, there's a steady decline. Do you see that? From 2013 to today, in roughly half the time it took to reduce those numbers, we've skyrocketed back to those historic heights. In 2018, we tracked 1,879 incidents, and although the overall number is down by 5% compared to 2017, if you've read any of the news articles about this, 2018 is still tied for third place as the highest number of incidents since we began tracking. There were significant increases in assault and harassment, which are more severe, and there were more of them and more severe activity. The decrease came, it was seen in the category of vandalism. So, you know, again, when we talk about the kid who scrawls something across the bathroom stall, those numbers have decreased, yet the numbers of people being harassed and assaulted have increased. ADL reported 249 anti-Semitic incidents attributed to known extremist groups or individuals inspired by extremist ideology. This represents 13% of the total number of incidents and is the highest level of anti-Semitic incidents with known connections to right-wing extremism since 2004. These incidents were a result of anti-Semitic, these incidents include anti-Semitic flyering campaigns and a series of robocalls perpetrated by a neo-Nazi. Nearly half of the incidents of harassment were targeting Jewish institutions, and they were mostly by known white supremacists or right-wing extremists. What we found is K through 12 schools, as well as colleges and universities, continue to be the scenes of significant numbers of anti-Semitic incidents. We recorded 344 incidents in K through 12 non-Jewish schools and 201 incidents at universities across the country. And I know you went into some of this in the previous presentation also, from what I hear, so I'm not going to go heavily into it, but just to kind of review what some common tropes and stereotypes for anti-Semitism are. And if you need me to divine anything, I will, but the Jewish deicide, Jews seen as the other, the blood libel, Jewish greed, Jewish power and control, dual loyalty, etc. Does anybody have any questions on what any of them mean? Sure. The blood libel. The blood libel. Sure. So that refers to the allegation that Jews murder Christians, specifically Christian children, so that we can use their blood for matzah for Passover. Yeah. It dates back to the Middle Ages, and way back in the beginning it led to a lot of mob violence. Any others? Jewish deicide is the slur Christ killer. It was used by mobs to incite violence against Jews during the Crusades. Okay? Everybody good? Okay. So, we also want to talk about anti-Israel versus anti-Semitism, because this is a big issue with a lot of people, right? And so, very clearly I want to state that not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. As a matter of fact, I was having a conversation with somebody this afternoon, and we were talking about as ADL, and maybe now's a good time to remind you, we're a 501c3. We speak out on policy, not person or party. We do call out behavior and statement and policy, right? So just to make that a really clear definition. Same thing when it comes to Israel. ADL spoke out extremely harshly against that nation's state law. And so, yes, it is okay to criticize policy or action, right? But, here's my big but. It can cross the line, and it can cross the line really easily. So what we use is Natan Sharansky's 3 Ds of anti-Semitism: demonization, double standards, and delegitimization. So portraying Israel's actions as evil, blaming Israel for the region and the world's problems, comparing Israelis to Nazis, that's when you're sliding into anti-Semitism, right? Double standards, singling out or disproportionately criticizing Israel on human rights grounds, while similar actions are happening in other countries without being called out. And delegitimization, denying Israel's right to exist. Left-wing anti-Semitism is predominantly focused on criticizing Israel to varying ends. Increasingly, left-wing anti-Semites work to ostracize American Jews who support Israel. And again, as I said in the beginning, legitimate critiques of Israeli government, its policies, or politicians are not considered anti-Semitic. But when people blame all Jews for the actions of the state, use anti-Jewish stereotypes or conspiracy theories, or make comparisons to Nazis that are historically and factually untenable, they manipulate emotions, negate the history of Jewish persecution, denigrate the Holocaust, intend to inflict pain, erase Jewish victimization, and legitimize the hatred of Jews. Nationwide, the FBI tracked a 37% increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes. So when you compare what I might say about the FBI and their data and their statistics to what I would say about ADL and our data and our statistics, is that this is 2017 is the most recent FBI information that there is. For each year, the FBI in November of the following year, so this information just came out in November of 2018, releases their report. ADL tries to release our report in March, which is why I have the new information for 2018 already. So back to the FBI stuff. Almost 60% of all hate crimes, a definite majority of the cases, are against people based on their race or ethnicity. An analysis of data for victims of single-bias hate crime incidents showed that 59.6% of the victims were targeted because of their race, it's pretty redundant, race, ethnicity, or ancestry. It translated into over 5,000 victims. 48.6% of the race ethnicity crimes motivated by anti-Black or anti-African American bias. Right-wing extremists, including white supremacists, have high intent and high capability right now. They are responsible for 75% of extremist-related violence over the last 10 years. White supremacist ideology was connected to 49 of the 50 extremist-related murders in 2018, including the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh in October. Anti-Semitism is core to their ideology. They believe Jews are the masterminds of white genocide and are the enemy of the white race. The perpetrators of these shootings that we've seen this year in Christchurch, New Zealand, and Poway, California, also adhere to this ideology. And this threat is growing. I don't mean to scare you guys, but these people are energized and they're out there recruiting people. This ideology has also manifested in increased incidents immediately following the election, at the inauguration in Charlottesville. Public displays like Charlottesville, vicious cyber harassment campaigns, and like I said, the Tree of Life shooting. Left-wing extremism, while not necessarily manifesting itself in violence the same way that right-wing extremism is, still causes harm. And we see manifestations of it in anti-BDS, anti-Israel BDS campaigns, especially on college campuses. We saw ADL tracked a 182% spike in incidents the month after Charlottesville compared to the prior month. Charlottesville didn't just happen in a vacuum. It didn't just come out of nowhere. ADL had been keeping very close tabs on the signs that ultimately led up to the August 12th Unite the Right rally. In early 2016, we noticed a shift in the overall white supremacist movement in the United States, where the white supremacists began to feel more emboldened. And we monitored this bravado to see where it would lead. Alongside the racism, nativism, xenophobia on display at the Unite the Right event, there was also anti-Semitism. Marchers threw Nazi salutes as they waved swastika flags, proudly wore swastika pins and shirts, and shouted Sieg Heil. A sign carried by rally-goers warned that the Jewish media is going down. Another declared that Jews are Satan's children. A white supremacist told a reporter, and I'm quoting, so excuse my language, "The fucking Jew lovers are gassing us." And another one called a counter-protester a kike. Blood and soil, which the white supremacists chanted several times, is a translation of the Nazi slogan Blut and Boden, and at least once, white supremacists changed their refrains from "you will not replace us" to "Jews will not replace us." So in Philadelphia, on the anniversary of Charlottesville, we announced the Black Jewish Alliance of the ADL. Mayor Jim Kenney reflected on growing up in South Philly with a significant Jewish community, meeting Holocaust survivors who lived nearby and hearing their stories. And I'll quote him, he said, "I can't imagine what a Holocaust survivor must have thought watching the tiki torches of Charlottesville and listening to what they were spouting," he said, calling the rally a despicable display of hatred and bigotry. This alliance was formed after a gentleman, Blaine Stoddard, he's a local businessman, attended an ADL event a few years ago, and he came to us afterwards and he said, "So I sat in that room, I was invited as a guest to this event, and I sat in that room and I heard Nancy Berenbeer, our regional director, talk about the ADL, and I thought to myself, this is a civil rights organization." Looked around the room, where are all the black people? And so he literally came to us and said, "I need to bring black leaders in our community, black entrepreneurs, to the ADL so that we can talk about some of the issues that we're confronting and figure out how we can confront them together." One of the things that we've done in this group is create a story called Sharing Our Stories, Sharing Ourselves. And I don't want to make any promises because it is a bit far away and we would be talking about having like 6 people drive down here, but we have a panel of folks that go out, and we've been doing them in faith-based situations, two black people and 2 Jewish people. And the question is to talk about your identity and when you have faced racism or anti-Semitism, also to talk about your identity and when you are proud to be that identity and where that led you. And it is a whole breakout group activity. I can probably share some of the prompts and talking points with you, and maybe you can do something similar here.
I have a question. Yes, I have a question for you. I'd just like to stay with domestic terrorism for a minute.
I'm sorry?
I said I would like to just stay with domestic terrorism for a minute. Because I think we're all aware of how serious the problem is becoming.
Could you come up to the mic?
Oh, sorry. I started to say, but I'd like to stay with domestic terrorism, the whole issue,
Right.
for just a minute. Because I think we all have some sense of how severe the problem is becoming, and it's growing. And it's growing. ADL is a long-standing organization with
a very fine reputation, and it's well known internationally. We have a White House that is unwilling to acknowledge the domestic terrorism and the severity of it. And so with your influence, what are you able to do as a single organization or in coalition with black organizations or other ethnic organizations? What are you able to do?
So that's a good question. So like I said, we try to accomplish our mission with investigation, education, and advocacy, and that's where that advocacy piece comes in, right? So we're going to Harrisburg next week. A group of folks was just lobbying at the federal level in DC last week. We are constantly advocating our legislators as to what to do. And where we see either legislation that's needed and requesting that they co-sponsor it and introduce it, or that we encourage them to sign on to something or vote in one way or another, or so that is probably the best way to handle that. We don't have a king, contrary to some people's belief. Again, ADL doesn't have a one-seat we don't. Adhere to any party or politic. But right now, the fact that the House has one type of mindset and the Senate has another type of mindset, not a lot's going to get done. So this is the time and this is the place to be advocating at the state and local levels, because that's where we're going to be able to make a difference. That's what ADL is doing. We're focusing more of our time and energy at the state and local levels right now, and hopefully the waves will change where we'll be able to have an impact at the federal level again. And that doesn't mean we don't advocate at the federal level, we do. It just means that we're doing it with a realistic understanding of how much can actually get done. So, anti-Semitism and white supremacy. White supremacy is a term that is used to characterize various belief systems, central to which are one or more of the following key tenets. Whites should have dominance over people of other backgrounds, especially where they may coexist. Whites should live by themselves in a whites-only society. White people have their own culture that is superior to other cultures, and white people are genetically superior to other people. As a full-fledged ideology, white supremacy is far more encompassing than simple racism or bigotry. Most white supremacists today further believe that the white race is in danger of extinction due to a rising flood of non-whites who are controlled and manipulated by Jews, and that imminent action is needed to save the white race. This accelerationism is what it's being called. This is what is behind what has happened in Poway and Christchurch and in Pittsburgh. This idea that you have to kill Jews because you have to kill them before the white race is extinguished. That's what's behind, that belief system is what's behind that. So we'll talk a little bit about white supremacist groups. There are more than what we'll talk about. Identity of ROPA. Their slogan is, "You will not replace us." It reflects a belief that unless immediate action is taken, the white race is doomed to extinction by this rising tide of color. That's their belief system. The Loyal White Knights of the KKK is one of the largest and most active Klan groups in the United States. Those folks follow a version of traditional Klan ideology infused with neo-Nazi beliefs and are best known for their distribution of racist and anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, and homophobic propaganda. You'll see flyering campaigns by these guys. Patriot Front is a group whose members maintain that their ancestors conquered America and bequeathed it to them and them alone. They define themselves as American fascists or American nationalists and are focused on preserving America's identity as European American. And then Vanguard America. They're actually a growing group. The manifesto of Vanguard America says, the racial stock of this nation was created for white Christian Anglo-Europeans by white Christian Anglo-Europeans. All other ethnicities, races, religions, demographics are not compatible with this nation's original culture. A mass exodus, isolation, apartheid, segregation, or separation must be implemented to retain the good order and the longevity of our country. So this is what we're dealing with. Anybody know? So ADL also maintains one of the largest hate symbols databases in the United States. It's used by law enforcement. It's available to anybody if you ever want to look up hate symbols. Anybody know what 1488 means?
Is it referencing Hitler?
Partially, yeah.
What did he say?
He said references Hitler. Anybody heard? Okay, so you're right, that 88. H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. And so 88 is HH. HH is Heil Hitler. 14. 14 stands for the 14 words. The 14 words is a slogan of white supremacists that contains 14 words. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. 1488 is specifically white supremacist based. So together, the numbers form a general endorsement of white supremacy. ADL Center on Extremism reported that on-the-ground white supremacist actions have been relatively infrequent on college campuses until recently. White supremacist engagement tactics on campus range from the virtual, such as sending racist flyers to thousands of campus fax machines, to on-the-ground rallies and speaking engagements. More extremists are also making a point of visiting campuses to speak with students individually. This is a part of a push to move their activism from online to real-world action. The messages range from white supremacist language to explicitly racist images and words that attack minority groups, including Jews, blacks, Muslims, non-white immigrants, and the LGBT community. The good news is the response from campus administrations has been amazing, and these types of flyers have been spoken out against and nearly universally rejected by students and faculty. We have to be a little bit careful about free speech rights, but it depends on whether or not it's a public school or a private school and whether or not they can impose their own rules and regulations. But they don't have to allow bias incidents to happen. And so they can speak out and they can do something about it, and most often than not, they hold rallies with students against them. Delaware, by the way, is not immune. A flyer was found at the University of Delaware. So this is an interesting piece. No conversation would ever be complete if we didn't talk about online hate. And the impact of social media. And I don't know if you've read the news recently, today, yesterday, YouTube is starting to implement some new policies and practices. We have been tracking online hate since the earliest days of the internet. Our Center of Technology and Society is based in the Silicon Valley and actively educates and advocates with these companies to create, not only to create their own terms of service, because again, when you talk about free speech, these are privately held companies. This is not the public square. So they have the right to set their own terms of service. And usually, when you read those terms of service, you know, every time you sign up for something and you get that big box filled with all those letters and you click agree with it, no one ever reads it, right? You just click agree. Those people that are putting hate out there are clicking that too, and they're clicking that they won't be putting hate out there. What we really are trying to do is to get some of these providers to enforce their terms of service, because many of them have these rules in their terms of service. We just need them to enforce them. 53% of Americans have experienced online harassment. 1/3 of harassment is based on a protected class. 16% of Jews report that they experience online harassment. There were 4.2 million anti-Semitic posts on Twitter in 2017. It's an internet-wide problem. So when Twitter does something like ban a bigot from their platform, what ends up happening is they just go to another platform. So there are other platforms out there like Gab or 4chan, which does not have the same terms of service that Facebook or Twitter or some of the more mainstream ones have. And so there's a debate going on right now as to whether or not it's appropriate to kick these haters off of the mainstream sites. Because what happens is, if it's on a mainstream site, then people can shine a light on it, people can argue back at them, people can talk them, can shed a light on it, right? When we kick them off of the mainstream sites, and I'm not advocating one way or another, it's a conversation and a decision to be made at a much higher level than me. But what happens when we kick them off, they go to these underground kind of sites, or, you know, they become echo chambers for their own message. And we then don't know what they're talking about. We then don't see it as a general community, and we have no way to combat against it. So there's a real fine line there. As you can see, this work is not easy. When you talk about hate online and you're trying to vet out, you know, who's speaking badly or what to do about it, the most common words found in hate comments are pretty much the same exact words that are found in non-hate comments, right? The words that are strongly associated with hate speech are also words that, you know, can be used in other ways. So the first director, the founding director of our Center on Technology and Society, spoke at one of our board meetings about a year or so ago, and I don't know if the statistics have changed by then, but she said it's really hard, and the best way she can use to describe how hard it is the word bitch. Most people would say if you call somebody a bitch, it's a derogatory term. What do you think are the most commonly found 2 words before the word bitch online? And don't quote me because it was a couple of years ago, 93% of the time, these 2 words precede the word bitch online. What do you think the words are there?
You go.
You go?
Yeah.
You go, bitch. Close. Huh? F. Yeah, no. Anybody else?
Son of.
Son of. Nope. Happy birthday. So, you take the word bitch off the internet, you use that as a goal point for a derogatory term, you're stopping 94% of people from wishing their friends happy birthday. And that's just to show like the nuance, right? It really, I love that little story when she said that, and everybody gets that reaction. But it's hard. It's not as easy, you know, it's not a surface thing. It's very complicated, and actually, just a little bit off because this wasn't part of my thing, but we just recently got a press release talking about how artificial intelligence after the fact, when the internet was first created, the folks that created the technology never imagined the kind of security breaches that would happen and how we would all, all of our identity stuff would be lost and our social security numbers and our credit cards and all of that stuff. And now, when they're creating new technology platforms, all of that security stuff is being built right in from the beginning, right? So that's what we're working with the tech companies to do right now, is we never imagined the way that the internet would be used for hate. And using artificial intelligence and trying to kind of backtrack and root out what's happening based on the systems that are already created is very difficult. So we're working with the tech companies to create new technologies and build into the new technologies that are created, just standardly build in anti-hate software. So I mentioned this a little bit, but 2018 included the deadliest attack on Jews in the history of the United States, the massacre of 11 Jewish worshipers and an additional 2 more injured at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh by a white supremacist in October. The Pittsburgh attack was one of 39 reported physical assaults on Jewish individuals in 2018, a 105% increase over 2017. The total of 59 individuals were victims of assault, not including the police officers that were injured at Tree of Life. An examination into what was believed to be the perpetrator, Robert Bauer's account on Gab, again, one of those low, more quiet sites that most people don't have access to, revealed a deep-seated hatred of Jews. A month before the attack, the account referred to Jews as all the vile, degenerate oven dodgers, saying it was time for them to convert your stuff to shekels and flee. Time is critical. The white supremacist conspiracy theory that Jews are behind efforts to impose mass immigration into the United States with the goal of harming or destroying the white race seems to have motivated this shooter in the days prior to the shooting and may have played a role in his decision to perpetrate this attack. In March 2015, an apparent white supremacist went on a shooting rampage in 2 mosques in central Christchurch, New Zealand, reportedly killing 50 people and wounding many others. This white supremacist violence underscores the fact that white supremacy is a global threat whose ideology manifests itself around the world and results in acts of violence. Australian police identified that shooter as Burstein. He was 28 years old. He apparently used social media to amplify his attack, streaming a live video of the shooting on Facebook, which was then posted on other platforms such as YouTube. He also appears to have posted a manifesto online just prior to the shooting. On Saturday, April 27th, just last month, or a little bit more than a month ago, exactly 6 months to the day since Pittsburgh, John Ernest opened fire at a Chabad of Poway synagogue in California, killing 1 worshiper. This guy was only 19 years old. He was a nursing student in San Diego. He also, it seems, was a dedicated white supremacist. A manifesto purportedly written by him was uploaded to the document hosting site Pastebin shortly before the attack. Brenton Tarrant, the guy from Christchurch, New Zealand, also used Pastebin to share his manifesto. Both of these guys' manifestos shared the same themes and rhetoric. Ernest's manifesto included Islamophobic language as well as extreme anti-Semitism, underscoring the threat of right-wing extremism and that it poses threats to Jews and Muslims alike. White supremacists target people of color, immigrants, and the LGBTQ community. When it comes to violence against religious faiths, they disproportionately target Jews and Muslims. Christian institutions are rarely targeted by right-wing extremists, and in most cases, such as the 2015 shooting attack by Dylan Roof at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, the basis of that attack was racial, not religious. This is our heat map. And again, if anyone has time and is interested in this kind of thing, it's on our website. HEAT stands for Hate, Extremism, Anti-Semitism, and Terrorism. This map helps us visualize the data. And you can go on the map, and it doesn't show it from this screenshot, but at the top it says, like, location. You know, you can do it by state, you can do it by zip code, you can do it by ideology, you can do it by whether or not it's harassment or vandalism. You can do it by type of extremism. It's an amazing thing. You can kind of sort and parse that out. So what I did here was Delaware. And in the last 2 years, there have been 17 anti-Semitic or racist incidents reported in Delaware. We don't receive a lot of complaints from the Delaware area, to be honest. And I'm sure you would agree with me if I say it's because they're not being reported, not because they're not happening. Most likely, I think people don't realize that they can report them. So the difference between an incident and a crime, and always report crimes to law enforcement, an incident doesn't have to rise to the level of a crime, but it still should be documented and reported somewhere, and we document and report all types of incidents, not only anti-Semitic incidents. So if you are a witness or a victim, or hear someone else talk about a situation, please call us and let us know so that we can include it in our databases. Some of the things that have happened around Delaware include in Harrington and Seaford, the Loyal White Knights, whom we talked about earlier, distributed recruitment flyers in Princess Anne that read, "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." That same Klan group distributed racially charged recruitment flyers in and around Seaford. Oh, I think I said Seaford too. There was racist graffiti found at a playground in Newcastle County. In Newark, Patriot Front, we talked about those folks too, left Defend Your Nation flyers at the University of Delaware. The flyers depicted Jewish control over immigration. Hacked business printers in Rehoboth and Cheswold printed out racist and anti-Semitic materials. Anti-Semitic comments were allegedly made during a staff meeting in Bridgeville. Someone was targeted with anti-Semitic and racist hate mail in Delaware City. And in Newark, a stairwell at the University of Delaware was defaced with swastika graffiti. So things are happening around here. Let us know what they are. As I conclude, I want to just talk a little bit about, you said, what can we do about it? What's ADL doing about it? So in May, just about 6 weeks ago, June, not even 3 weeks ago, our Senior Vice President of Policy, George Salim, gave testimony to Congress. And I'm going to just quote some of that testimony for you as he's talking about white supremacy and the threat of domestic terrorism. More can be done to counter this threat, and more must be done before the next inevitable tragedy. Yet, instead of scaling up to meet this threat, the government seems to be scaling down. Fewer resources dedicated toward preventing and countering extremism, little transparency and accountability with respect to how the government sees the threat and what it is doing to counter it. So exactly what you were talking about. It is paramount to counter extremism in all its forms. But at this time, white supremacist extremism warrants far greater attention than it currently receives. The data is clear. The white supremacist threat in the United States are at disturbingly high levels, and we must work together now to ensure that the worst is not yet to come. ADL urges swift and comprehensive action to counter the threat of white supremacy. We urge members of Congress and the administration to speak out strongly and decisively against white supremacy, call it by name, to urgently consider legislative proposals designed to improve the government's ability to counter the threat, to invest in prevention efforts to stop the threat from getting worse, to improve and increase data and reporting to broaden government transparency into how the government sees the threat and what it is doing to counter it, and to work with the Technology Center to advance common sense solutions to prevent the abuse of their platforms by white supremacists. He reiterated, we must act swiftly, decisively, and comprehensively to counter the threat of white supremacy and prevent it from metastasizing. So what can you do? Here are some recommendations that can help you challenge bias. So the first thing I'm going to say is assess the situation. Think before you act. Is it safe to respond? If it is safe, because if it is not safe to respond, then don't go report it somewhere. If it is safe, think about what do you want to accomplish. Do you want to educate that person? Do you want to just interrupt that person and stop them from doing what they're doing? Do you want to provide support to the victim? You know, one of the tools that I learned when somebody's being, if you witness somebody being attacked for something, you're the attacker, you're the victim. I'll say target, we don't really use the word victim anymore, right? So instead of getting up in your face and potentially getting you fighting me and putting myself in danger, Jane, I haven't seen you in forever, come here, I want to talk to you. Pull the person out, right? Get them out of that situation and just get away. That's one of my favorite ways to just kind of, so do you want to interrupt and talk to the perpetrator, or do you want to just support the victim? You got to decide what you want to do. And then, if you know the person, if it's possible, maybe not in that moment, but there may be a time where you can engage them in dialogue and try to explain to them why what they said was inappropriate. I have a friend who made a comment to me, you know, they were golfing, and his friend brought some other friends, and the other friends that he didn't know were saying, you know, some biased, I think it was, I don't know if it was anti-Semitic stuff, and he didn't know what to say, you know, or what to do. But later on, he thought about the things to say, and he actually picked up the phone and called those people and said, you know what? When you said this, this, and this is what I heard you say, and this is what it meant to me, and I'd appreciate it if we ever golf again that you don't do that you don't say those things ever again. Just talk to them, right? So when you speak up, you know, assume good intent, ask questions, interrupt, make it individual. You know, when you said that, I felt. Those kinds of things. Get involved. So I'm going to say join ADL's Walk Against Hate. I know it would be a 2.5-hour drive for you. It's at the Navy Yard. We just held it 2 weeks ago, so the next one is in May of 2020, but put it on your calendars now. You can bring anti-bias training and resources to your schools and your communities. So again, as you talk about like the school to prison pipeline, or some of the education resources that I talked about in the beginning that just incorporate anti-bias training into everyday lesson plans. Excuse me, you can talk to your schools about using some of those, and they're free, they're online. Visit ADL's Advocacy Center to promote civil rights issues. Security. Protecting your religious institution is something that ADL has been involved with for years and years with the Jewish community. Protecting your Jewish institution, we have changed that piece of training to protecting your religious institution because that's needed these days. It's online, it's got lots of low and no cost, really sensible tips and tricks and ideas for faith-based communities to consider when it comes to security. I have report anti-Semitic or bias incidents to ADL, call me if something happens. Ask law enforcement agencies to reach out for training and resources. Find out if your law enforcement agencies are actually reporting hate crimes to the FBI. Find out, share ADL posts, follow us on social media and share our posts, and donate. Donate to ADL, donate to any organization that you believe is doing the good work to fight this and to help them be successful. So as I close, this is my contact information if you need to reach me. I want to end with the words of our CEO. In a recent blog post, he wrote, "Now more than ever, there is no us versus them. We are all black, we are all Jews, we are all Muslims, we are all Christians, we are all men, we are all women, we are all immigrants, we are all refugees, we are all LGBT. And when the rights of one of us are threatened, all of us are threatened." So thank you for having me speak, and I'll stand any questions and chat.
Okay, questions?
And please come up to the mic so everybody can hear.
You mentioned that the focus of ADL is shifting from the federal to the states because it's sort of hopeless at the federal level. So
Some of our advocacy efforts.
Yeah. If you could give us some ideas about what you're trying to do in the states that we might be able to bring to Delaware.
Okay, great. So I have to say, part of my job is reading the Delaware and the Pennsylvania legislative reports that come out every day after their sessions about what they're doing, and the resolution to whatever. They list all of the things. There's not a lot in Delaware that we disagree with. Your leadership in Delaware is pretty good. I mostly write letters commending them and thanking them for taking certain actions. It is rare in Delaware that I am condemning something that they've done. They pretty much got it. I mean, you've got Lisa Rochester Blunt, you've got people who are thinking along the right ways. She's federal, but Chris Coons and Carper, their mindsets are in the right place. As far as I can see, their mindsets are in the right place. If there is a specific issue with, I don't know, I'd have to look for something for Delaware. Now in Pennsylvania, I can tell you I have a whole list of things. So for example, we don't have hate crimes laws in Pennsylvania. You do in Delaware. What we have in Pennsylvania is ethnic intimidation laws, and it does not cover LGBTQ, it does not cover women, it does not cover disabled people. And so we're fighting for fairness there. Where, in Pennsylvania there are a lot of, hate crimes pieces that are coming out right now. I think the biggest thing, maybe even for Delaware, because this is an across the country issue, is training law enforcement to understand what a hate crime is and making it mandatory for them to fill out the FBI's hate crime reports. Because what happens is, a significant number of law enforcement agencies fill out the report because they have to. They fill out the report and write 0 because they're not really paying attention, they don't care. So I would say look into that maybe and see if that's an issue for you guys. School to prison pipeline is everywhere. That's not necessarily a legislative issue, but it's one of my pet peeve issues that I think if we can work with the school systems, that would be something to focus on.
That's exactly what I was going to talk about. My daughter lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and the children were several times got bullied, anti-Semitic remarks. So she went to the principal and said, let's make this a safe school. And that's what happened. And ADL was very instrumental in helping to make that happen. But I'm not sure what our schools here are. Have they qualified for that? Do you know? Does anybody know?
Yes, and I brought quite a few of them. I think there might be enough for everybody, I'm not sure. Of the our region and what we accomplished in 2018, our highlights book. And in it, it highlights a program that we do, and we do it across the country, but Pennsylvania is actually one of the Philadelphia region, not Pennsylvania, because we do have Delaware schools in, we have New Jersey schools too. One of our strongest programs is called No Place for Hate.
Right.
And that's what you're referring to, that we bring into the school district, and the school district, from the youngest kids to the highest level administrators get trained, do projects that are inclusive and welcoming, and hopefully the intent is to change the culture of the school. It doesn't mean, No Place for Hate in a school doesn't mean that there will never ever be another hate incident, because there always will be another hate incident. There's going to be that kid who decides to push the buttons. You know, the kids that get trained are going to age out, new kids are going to come in, they're not going to have been trained the same way, all of that kind of stuff is going to happen. But what it does mean is that the other kids around them in the school and that the administration responds to it appropriately, right? Because when it becomes not cool, they're not going to do it again.
To your first comment, I wanted to say that maybe there is no explicit laws in Delaware, but guess what happened in this legislation, in this legislative session, there was SB 95, who was going to protect in the front the rights of workers. And at the end, it works in the construction field. What it really was going to do was going to take every Latino undocumented that put the roots in thousands of houses and do many other things in the construction field out of work, because it included a requirement that to register with the labor division, they needed to present Social Security number. Give me a break. That was like, get out of here. So that law was proposed in New Jersey, and the Latinos have to flee the area to find other work somewhere else. And 5 months later, the governor went all away and said, come back, because the industrial construction field was with no labor. And now you need to see, there was a year of conversations and we were not included, the Latinos. And then who was supporting this? The labor union that happens to be white. And also there was a voice like a concern that, a lot of African American people, and this was reported to us that a leader said, there's a lot of African Americans getting out of prison and I want those jobs for my people. We try to, think we need to continue producing the wealth that Latinos are creating in the industry, and we were able to tackle all the things that would have been devastated. But see? So
in that situation, so I would encourage you, if you're watching those kinds of things, to contact us when you see something like that happening in the beginning stages, because we could write letters to the legislature and we could make phone calls. We've got great relationships. And what we would do is if you had a piece of legislation that you see as being problematic or could cause an issue down the line, on the face of it, it looks okay, but then when you dig deeper, this is the actual ramification of it, I would send that. So again, so ADL does not provide lawyers to people to represent them in discrimination cases and things like that, but we have a staff of lawyers. I could send it to my regional counsel. They could review it, they could see if we agree with you. If we agree with you, we could sign on to coalition letters, we could work together. And so we would be happy to, to hear about that.
But in this case, as I said, there was a work done 1 year. And when we the Latino leaders knew about it, 1 day before we went to committee. So we all jumped, 30 of the Latinos jumped into committee and said, well, you know, you have to give us 2 weeks. And with that we got that and we worked out.
Great.
You gave us a lot of great data, and we really appreciate that, because that's really what tonight was supposed to be about. The trend line that you showed of hate instances over, I think, since '79 to the present day.
And that's anti-Semitic incidences,
because
that's what we've tracked and reported on, which we've now begun tracking all of it. We're not reporting on all of it yet, but we're tracking all of it, but that audit is anti-Semitic only, but okay.
Okay, that's great to know. There's definitely peaks and valleys. In fact, I noticed right in the very first 2 years, the trend in those first 2 years was almost as dramatic as it was the last, between 2013 and 2017. Peaks and valleys. Is there any study, any analysis done to show what's causing that, any correlation?
So there is, I don't have it off the top of my head, but there is data that tells you like what was happening in those years.
That's what I'm asking.
And so if you were to read the audits, and look on our website and kind of put in search in our website, it will tell you like what was happening in those years when it went up and down and all of that kind of stuff. It will go in deeper about that and you'd be able to find that information. Yeah, absolutely, because there are things going on around the world in those years that impact that for sure.
I have a question. One of the things that we're trying to achieve is to help people see how the circumstances of African Americans and Jews are the same. For example, Jewish synagogues, have been damaged. Jews have been murdered in their churches. African Americans have experienced the same kind of thing in their churches. There's a Holocaust. There's slavery. So there are some similarities. But if I were to ask you, with the similarities, how would you contrast the experience of African Americans to Jews? How would you say that group's experience is distinct, different, and thereby requires...
Yes, I absolutely have an answer for you.
Does everybody understand that question?
Yeah. So, really interesting question, because one of the things that I've learned from this group that we've started, the Black Jewish Alliance of ADL, and even when you look at it on the surface, so anti-Semitism, although it's on the rise and becoming a little bit more normalized now, is generally frowned upon, right? Jews do, we can go anywhere, there are not country clubs that are closed to us anymore, et cetera, et cetera. The Jewish experience in the United States is pretty much that of a white person, right? Where we've got lots of privilege for the most part. I'm just generalizing, not to stereotype, but to generalize. Our experiences with anti-Semitism tend to be negating the ideological folks who believe, this stuff that we were just talking about. But our individual day-to-day experiences with anti-Semitism tend to be the one-offs, right? that person said something, why are you trying to Jew me down, right? Or whatever, like somebody said something, somebody did something, somebody's harassing somebody, it's a one-off, it's an individual experience, right? It's not institutionalized anymore. There's no real institutionalized anti-Semitism in the United States anymore. That's very different, I think, for people of color. One of my friends on the Black Jewish Alliance was talking, and we were just talking about our different experiences, and she made a comment that her husband is dark, really dark. He is a physician. He drives with his license and registration scotch taped to his dashboard. He is that afraid of reaching into his glove compartment in front of a police officer. That is a really different experience than being Jewish and driving and getting stopped. All right? So the institutionalization of racism that is so in our systems still makes it very different than what Jews experience as anti-Semitism. That school-to-prison pipeline issue, that kids are being punished at different rates. So there's some historically some similarities, but what we're experiencing today, again, and some similarities with what we're experiencing with the white supremacists. But in America today, the Black experience is very different from the Jewish experience. My opinion. Anyone else? Thank you. This is lovely. I do just want to remind you, I put my information up there for a reason. If you need me, feel free to call. Thank you.